Mach 3, give me crew show on 2, 3, and 4.
Line 1, exit 1.
6, 3. Mach 3, give me start line 2.
5 electric. Mach 3. Line 2, Mach 9.
Mach 3, give me start line 1 and crew show on 7 and 9.
Line 1, crew show 79, Mach 9.
Yeah, do something. I hate weapons.
Super Ops, line 3, red ball, avionics.
Super Ops. Line 7 is code 3 for Flickas.
Fuck. Okay, so this week, well, I shouldn't say week anymore. So this episode, I'm joined by Kurtis Ott. But before we get into the topic and what we're going to talk about, I just wanted to talk about the change in the podcast where I'm moving from a weekly schedule to whenever I have content or something worth talking about or enough information to talk about, that's when the episode's going to be released. And the big driver for that was over the last June episodes and I think one in May, I said something that I thought was true and ended up later being not true. And I kind of realized that the further I get removed from the military, the less immediate knowledge and understanding I have of the military. So it kind of requires me to do more and more research to make sure I'm not saying things that are incorrect. So like opinion episodes, which is kind of what this is. It's let's talk about what you think and what you're experiencing, and I'll support, disagree, or anything else. We can kind of just chat. It's less fact driven. It's not this is how it is and this needs to change type of deal. It's this is what I feel or this is what I think. So those are a little easier to produce because there's a lot less research to do. So basically, instead of the schedule driving the content, now it's going to shift to the content's driving the schedule. If I have something to record, I'll get it recorded and I'll get it released. And the reason I shut down the Patreon is just because those people kind of signed up for a subscription that required a weekly release, and it wouldn't be fair to them, even though I think a lot of them wouldn't care. But it wouldn't be fair to them to randomly release episodes when they're paying a monthly fee. So I just demonetized it. So these will kind of come in spurts and droughts. So I appreciate everybody's support, and I hope you guys stick around for when the episodes are released. And without further ado, today I'm talking to Chief Master Retired Kurtis Ott, who's been on multiple episodes, talk about maintenance culture, resiliency, lots of things. We talked about Air Force stand downs was the most recent one we talked about. And today we're going to talk about just diversity, or the idea of diversity in general. Is that right, Kurtis?
Yes.
So if you listen to the last episode I did before I took the break, episode 47, that was a lot of it was talking about diversity with Ashley Grugan, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and kind of her experience as a woman of color who also happens to be bisexual in aircraft maintenance. And then my experience as somebody on the outside kind of looking into that culture. So following up on that, Kurtis, I'm interested in your thoughts. So you know how we do it, Kurtis. We don't really have necessarily a structure. We'll kind of build it as we go, which ends up being a pretty good conversation. But if you want to go ahead and start, I'll start writing down my notes and we can go.
Oh, where to begin? This is a very, very...
It's a diverse conversation. It's a diverse
conversation for sure.
Yeah.
Even before you got with me, I had been having conversations with folks concerning diversity in and out of the Air Force. And I have gotten lots of feedback from individuals concerning this. And once again, this wasn't in anticipation of this podcast. This was just me being interested or them just sharing their story. And one individual that I'm going to kind of be very, very bland on this, but I've known him for a good share of my life. Worked for a equipment manufacturing company, and he had moved up to a very prominent position within the company, and his boss came to him and said, "Hey, we're moving you to this other position." And it took him aback, and he said, okay, did I do something wrong? He said, well, no, you everything is fine, but you're a blocker. And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he says, you're blocking us being able to hire diversity. He said, so it's not based on my ability. It's based on the color of my skin. And the guy immediately got back and said, oh, no, that's not it. He says, well, it is. If you're looking to hire someone that isn't of my race, that doesn't seem right, but okay. He says, I'll tell you what, I've been working here a long time and I've reached the point where I can retire. Why don't you just give me a package? And so they were very relieved that he asked for that retirement package, and he retired and left. And now he's living a retiree's life, if you will. But that kind of, and once again, that was a story shared to me that I didn't ask about diversity or what have you. And another one in the Air Force trying to become a command chief. Nope. Every position he wanted to get, they were not hiring him. They would not hire him, even though he was highly qualified and his wing commander was making many calls saying, this is the guy that you want. He didn't get any of them, and they were all filled with people that were not of his same color.
So,
and
I guess let's unpack diversity just in general. I mean, I feel like the word is self-descriptive, but I guess what does when you hear the word diversity, what would be your definition, or what would you see as the definition being either misused or used commonly now?
Well, okay, so if you just kind of look at the word, it's of a diverse nature where there are multiples of different, in this case, different ethnicities, different colors, different, and not necessarily based on your ability, but based on who you are and how you were born. That's how I look. That's how when we're in this context of diversity in the Air Force, that's kind of how I'm looking at that.
So I think that's stopping short. I mean, that's probably what some people would say. So you're saying your race or how you're born, right? But that's stopping at birth. Like, how much is a person of color's experience dictated, how much of their diversity is just based on when they're born, or is it incorporating born until age 38 and all of the lived experiences in that time? It's not, I think it's not just about race. It's about, what did you experience that a white person never experienced?
Correct.
Right.
Right. And I get it. And when I joined the Air Force, I didn't know what racism was. I was raised in a all white community. I didn't know what racism was until I joined the Air Force, and they had to tell me about it. They actually had to sit me down and explain to me what racism was. I didn't know what it was. And if I would have been in an environment where racism would have been a big thing, or it would have existed. One of my first days on the flight line, my expediter threw the forms at me because I hadn't put the red line in the 781A for the expediter, or for the pro super. It wasn't a pro super back then, but the master sergeant come out and sign the ER. He threw the forms at me and said my forms looked like crap. That was the only thing that was missing. And threw the forms at me and said, you better get them right before, Sergeant so-and-so shows up to sign the ER, and drove away. And he's laughing as he's driving away. So my forms, I put everything together on the ground in front of the airplane, and I go next door to where a NCO was. Now, if I was a racist guy, there was no way I would have went to that guy because he was black.
Well, so I'm gonna challenge you there. You're creating this scenario where if someone has any racism, they are unwilling to talk to a black person.
No. no. But if I guess that you could say that I guess that's not really what I'm saying.
Okay.
But I guess that's kind of how it's turning out.
No worries.
But I could have went the other direction
Mm-hmm.
to a senior airman, but I wanted the NCO's perspective. And so I went to this guy and he sat me down, he went through it and he showed me what I had done wrong. And he says, okay, now you know. So I went back and I was ready for the master sergeant to do it. And as I went through my career thinking about that, and that's a very prominent moment in my life. Well, one of them, because the forms were thrown at me, but second of all, I don't know how I would have reacted had I have been in a different mindset racially. What I mean? Would I have gone that direction? Would I have cared? Would I have even thought about it? Man, I didn't even think about it. I just went to where the non-commissioned officer was. That's what I wanted to have done. So that's where I went. And and I look back on that, and was it as a result of me being blind to racism, or was it just me being I wanted to know the right answer,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't care how I got it or who gave me that information.
That's fair.
As long as it was the right answer, and I knew I could get the right answer from him.
So very frequently, you and I message offline about when the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force just does something that's doesn't make sense, or is indicative of somebody that doesn't have good judgment or a good leadership toolkit. Like, I'm pretty critical of her regularly, mm-hmm. right?
Yes.
And I think she is, well, and let me phrase it the way, and I think I've said this before. I think Chief Wright was an outlier for Chief Master Sergeants of the Air Force. I think most Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force are kind of lame ducks. I think they're just there. And mm-hmm. I think very often, and I've argued this before, I think a lot of people lose the ability to say no in order to make chief, or they just say yes to everything because that's how they make chief. And then if you amplify that to probably, in the late 90s, senior enlisted advisor or command chief, that also requires not saying no. And then you get up to numbered Air Force, MAGCOM, and then Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force. I think you've been saying yes for probably 15 fucking years, right? And I think a lot of Chief Master in the Air Force aren't good. I think they pick one or two like legacy things, maybe a uniform change, maybe an EPR change, maybe, whatever it was. And that's what they kind of leave their stamp in the Air Force. And then they typically slide out into the civilian world, and they have a really good job lined up at USAA, Lockheed Martin, you name it. And it's not like grunt work. It's like usually executive work. And I think Chief Wright, and I'll be honest, when Chief Wright was coming up and it was announced and I read his bio and I think he was a dental troop, I was like, well, fuck maintainers, I guess, because this guy is a fucking noner and he's not going to get any of this. And I was like, well, this is going to be a normal Chief Master of the Air Force. I didn't expect anything. And then he shut down course 15 in like 3 weeks. Like, we're turning this off. This is stupid. He just started stamping out stuff. I think he was the outlier. I don't think Chief Master Sergeants of the Air Force are normally like that, right?
You know what? Not really. Some of the older ones were very vocal about things. Chief McCoy, very vocal. Chief Benneker, very vocal. It wasn't until holy smokes, I would say Chief Campanella, where things started getting really bland in the land of Chief Master Sergeants of the Air Force. And it didn't really change, and the expectations were the same, where they didn't really do anything positive for the enlisted force. They did, but they really weren't a vocal advocate for the enlisted Air Force. In other words, standing up to the chief of staff and going, no, this is bullshit, and we're not going to have the enlisted force do this because they got their hands on the pulse. And if we do this, everything, here's what's going to fall off the rails.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the guys, way back in, the 70s and 80s that were very vocal
mm-hmm.
on being the voice for the enlisted Air Force, or, for the enlisted force.
Yeah. So that like disappeared, and probably so much so that I didn't have any
Mm-hmm.
awareness that that's how a Chief Master in the Air Force is supposed to be. And then Chief Wright showed up and he just started cranking out enlisted home runs. Like, he was legitimately called enlisted Jesus because people saw him as the savior. Like,
mm-hmm.
I mean, it's probably, it's heresy that they call him enlisted Jesus. It's probably semi-offensive to some people, but the reality is he was a savior for enlisted. Like, he saved probably a lot of people from getting kicked out through Course 15 or just getting ground up or divorces or any of these other things.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I was on when I went to the Senior NCO Academy, we had the Chief Master Sergeant Air Force Board come up there, and it was some of the older guys, and they got up there and they said, one of them, I can't think of it was, if it was McCoy or Binnicker, that said all of the good that we did was undone by Finkston.
Mm.
And I mean, they kind of railed on him quite a bit, and he wasn't a very good Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force. He was very standoffish, very not a good voice for the enlisted people either. I met him once, and I didn't have any good thoughts about him. And so that became kind of a normal for us in the Air Force. And, Chief Cody came in, and he was another one that was just
out of touch, I think is
very much so out of touch, very much so. He and I had some, Chief Cody and I had some conversations. I don't think he liked me much. I don't know. He probably doesn't. He doesn't remember me, I'm sure. But every time we'd meet, he would try and talk past me because, I was trying to find the voice for the enlisted force, and of course, he was focused on, I don't know,
whatever it is he was focused on. Yeah, he may not remember you because I think everywhere he went, he got pushback from everyone about all of his policies. So now you're just awash in a sea of chiefs with common sense and vocal cords.
And I would sit at the table, and other chiefs would be nodding their head, listening to him, and I'm sitting there looking around the room, going, "What's going on with you guys? Yeah, what are you guys doing? Are you saying yes because you want to be the next command chief? Is that what it is? Well, that wasn't what the chief rank was designed for. The chief rank, and if you pull up the chief's creed, it will tell you exactly what it is that we're supposed to be upholding. And you're the voice of no in a sea of yeses. Be reasonable with the no, but you are the no in a sea of yes.
Okay, so the current Chief Master in the Air Force, I'm really critical of. I mean, anybody listen to this podcast, I have 2 podcast episodes dedicated to how she screwed up both social media in dealing with the Bass or Base issue, and then the follow-up with her page being run by her, basically shutting down a dissenter in the comments and deleting his comments. And then also here and there, I'll post stuff on my page and or on her page that's critical, because I really think she's much like Cody. I think she's out of touch, right? So very often you and I go back and forth outside this podcast, and I think the thread and or the comments that you've kind of gathered, we'll say, from the people other chiefs or other maintenance leaders, is that she's quote unquote a diversity hire.
Yes.
So you want to unpack that?
Yeah. So from people that I've talked with, there were much better choices, people who are qualified. And that's kind of what my concern with diversity in the Air Force is. Are we hiring to be diverse, or are we hiring to hire the best person for the job?
Why do those have to be diametrically opposed?
Well, they don't, but it seems like that's what it is when you're not hiring, when you're hiring a down a single thread,
a shitty chief master in the Air Force. But that's the norm, I'd like to point out.
Or the person that isn't really qualified to be the command chief, you know?
So I guess it's because I think part of it is because people define qualified in different ways, right?
Yes.
And I'm gonna kind of go through a few things, and you being a prior chief and knowing how the promotion world works, we'll just use an aircraft maintainer because that's easy for me to identify, right? So, what are some of the things that get somebody promoted into master, senior, chief, We're talking maybe they're a PME instructor, right? Mm-hmm. That looks good. PME instructor. Maybe they were on the Thunderbirds, right? They have their bachelor's degree, right? Let's say they were deployed. And the other one, let's see the other one. They got all the medals they were supposed to get when they were supposed to get them, right?
Yep.
And EPRs are maximum, right? Mm-hmm. Let's do annual awards at different levels. Like let's say wing. Let's say at least wing. It will look good because that's you usually get your wing strat at that point. Right. Yep. Annual awards. What else? What am I forgetting here, Kurtis? That we usually are factors for promoting someone to senior chief and maybe further.
Volunteer.
Volunteer. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what else.
PT scores. PT scores.
Yep. Yeah. PT. I can't see. This is where me being a retiree is going to come back and bite me in the ass. Do you remember, man? Okay, so I'm going to caveat this going, I don't know if this is true. Do not cite this as gospel because I don't want to have to go back and edit this episode. Obviously, if you get a PT fail, it's going to have a career impact for an EPR. I think, last time I remember it was a referral or something terrible, right? Or a markdown. If you get like 100%, can that still go on the EPR? Do you remember?
Gosh,
you're Billy Badass,
it changed it changed several times while I was sitting in the squadron seat.
So let's put it this way: when we say PT for determining promotion, we'll caveat it as it could be that you're great at PT, or at the very least you didn't fail to exclude yourself from promotion, right?
Right.
PT performance. I guess I did PME instructor, but really I guess we should wrap up special duty into that altogether, right?
Yep.
Like TI instructor, or if you're like exec or something fancy.
Career broadening.
Sure.
Yep.
So those are, is that fair to say that, barring maybe one or two things we might have missed from aircraft maintainer, is that a good list for deciding who gets promoted?
Yes.
How are those any better at determining whether you're going to be qualified than your race, gender, or sexual orientation? Because EPRs are inflated. Annual awards are more politics than anything. Medals is if you're sucking up and basically not taking risks, because that's how you lose the opportunity to get medals. A bachelor's degree, I mean, I'm not trying to bash my alma mater, but my bachelor's degree was an online degree from a degree mill. I got like a 3.9 GPA and I didn't do anything. PME instructors, that's just, I know you have a love for PME and it can be a vehicle, but a lot of them are just Blue Falcons.
Right.
And Thunderbirds, most of those guys are douchebags, except for Jim Tibbetts, if he's listening. Volunteerism we unpacked in that episode, or volunteerism is more about being a PA person and outwardly showing the Air Force is better than it actually is. And PT performance, I personally don't see how that relates to being qualified. So if that's what the Air Force is saying is qualified, like we're picking all the things that don't matter. how is diversity of a lived experience of a gender or a race or sexual orientation any less important than those things I rattled off?
Less important?
Yeah, because you're saying that we're picking diverse people over qualified people. I just listed all the things that determine if people are qualified, and I think we all agree that they actually don't, right?
Right.
So is qualified?
And I see your point. Right up until they start looking at the color of the skin of the individual, and that's where a lot of my stories are coming from, either the color of the skin or the gender, and that's where a lot of the stories that are and the feedback that I've been getting on some people not being hired into the job that are completely unqualified for the job, but yet that's their position. They need that person, that not qualified person, but that particular gender or race person in that position. And one of the individuals I spoke with, she says there's some really dangerous decisions being made because a person in a maintenance field has very, very little maintenance experience and is leading the organization.
Yeah, but I feel like we've been doing that for 20 years.
And I want to be careful because I don't want to lay that out there on. The person is inside of maintenance, but it's a different place in maintenance that they have no business being. Okay. All right. Demanding some really bad decisions be even made that are risking the lives of airmen.
So what if that diverse person was a PME instructor, Thunderbirds, bachelor's degree, all the medals, max CPR, annual awards, volunteer PT performance, and they were selected because of these things as well as their race? Why is race the thing that we're hanging our hat on, saying that this was the wrong call for a position selection, when we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 other metrics that are trash for determining who goes into a position?
I don't know.
Here's what I'll say.
Answer that.
I think if we could discriminate, I mean, I should not be using that word in this episode, but I think if we were better at discriminating who's actually a good leader with the right metrics,
right?
Then when you also added in race and gender and sexual orientation for diversity, I think you wouldn't be having any problems, because every candidate would be, as you put it, qualified. And then you could go, okay, let's have a person of color in this unit, or let's promote, we want this many people of color, so that way we have a diverse experience. We have gay people in leadership. They understand these things, right? I think the problem is our field of candidates, we suck at filtering out the pieces of shit. And then we start selecting diversity things, and we're promoting pieces of shit independent of their diversity, but happens to be diversity is what picks this piece of shit over the white piece of shit, if that makes sense.
Right. Exactly. My position has always been and always will be, I don't care what the person looks like. Do they know how to do the job? Yes or no? And let me say, if I had, 10 people going for the same job, you know who I'm hiring? The highest qualified person. And based on my experience on what I'm hiring to, will determine who gets hired based on what experience and qualifications they have, and are they the best fit for the organization qualification wise.
So let's say we have 3 candidates, all are qualified. And I know there's also like varying degrees of qualified, and it's really hard to say that they're exactly the same, but you got to play the game in order to do the scenario, right? So let's say it's an Asian American woman, a black gentleman that's also gay, and a white male, right? And they're all equally qualified. So if any of them move into the position, you're going to have good performance, right?
Yes.
Now, is there anything wrong with saying, let's have the Asian American woman get promoted? I'm asking you.
My perspective would, at this point, if they're all equally qualified, which I'm going to tell you, Chris, right now,
it's impossible.
That's impossible.
Sure. Okay. But for the scenario, they're all equally qualified.
Let's talk
or
about.
Let's not even do equally qualified. Let's do, they all meet. Let's say there's a qualification threshold.
Yep.
where we want everybody to at least be able to do this well, whatever this is.
Yep.
And somebody might be a little bit better, but as long as all three are above this floor, then they're all considered qualified.
Yeah, and
is it wrong to hire the Asian American woman if you recognize you have no Asian American leaders in this organization, whatever it is, whatever level you're at, or of the chiefs
point,
less than 1% is?
Chris, at that point, it doesn't matter who you hire. You hire the person.
Well,
that,
I would say it does matter because the Asian American woman has the lived experience of an Asian American woman.
Sure.
So she can bring that toolkit, which honestly, you and I probably would not be able to imagine all the things she's imagining, right?
Correct. No, that is absolutely correct. I would have to see what is lacking in my organization.
Correct. Right. And it might be you don't have enough white males. And that's why beards aren't fucking being considered, because you don't have enough, or how about black males in leadership that have had to have shaving waiver issues, right? That's the whole thing about diversity, is you get somebody that has those lived experience to move up to that leadership position. While it's not quantifiable, you can say that person has certainly experienced certain things that other people haven't. Let's get them up and let's give them a voice, and let's have them start doing stuff that benefits the people he kind of represents.
And that makes sense. And that makes sense. If that's something that in your organization you have zero on, and that's what you're hiring to outside and inside of maintenance, I'm not too sure how that all would fold in. But
yeah, I'd probably say more of selecting command chiefs or group chiefs, right? Right. That'd probably be a good.
Exactly. And that's probably a better perspective than, hiring a section chief, because you just want the person, you want the best qualified
and your field
person
is usually
it's pretty narrow.
And how do we, just real quick, how do we usually pick group chiefs? I know it's the group commander's prerogative, but is it usually time and grade? Whoever's the oldest and crustiest?
Holy crap. There's criteria now. There's criteria right now. And the individual that I was talking with that, didn't get the command chief positions, I had to meet the criteria. And I've never asked what it is, but he said, yeah, there is a criteria now to meet as a group chief. Whereas the past, it was, the best person for the job, based on your, that you had internally. And was that the right answer? Was that the wrong answer? You're going to be hired because the group commander typically. Okay. The group commander is going to know you. And in the wing command, it used to be the wing commander knew who you were, and they would bring their own their own command chief with them when they would come somewhere, or they knew who they wanted when they were selected for the wing. They would immediately start thinking about who they want for their command chief. And as I was leaving the Air Force, a lot of the chiefs it was as if they were acting like they were looking for the next promotion, and I didn't understand that, because we were all promoted to chief and there's no other further promotion.
I know
there's different jobs, but they were acting competitively, like there was some other, promotion. There's some sort of E10 coming on.
You know what I think that's from? I think it's because so much of the Air Force is focused on extrinsic motivation, which is promotion. It's your status, your value is dictated by your sleeve and your stripes. And I think it cooks cognitively into a lot of these people's brains that they need to get the next status upgrade. And when you make chief, that's the thing about chief, much like a retiree, is the freedom of so many of the burdens of your career and promotion melt away when you put on that final stripe, that you finally are unfettered to give your honest criticism, opinions, and all these things. And I think people are still, their mind is still switched to promotion, and they shut down. They don't know how to say no. And then they still are chasing, and then it becomes, and this better than I do, so feel free to go apeshit on this. Then you get these ridiculous chief pecking order bullshit, like an AMU chief has to defer to the AMXS chief, the AMXS chief defers to the group chief, and then the group chief, is going back and forth with the command chief and or MAGCOM, when you start getting those higher up and stuff like that. And it's like, there's this want for military people to always know who's above them and who's below them, and try to get another step up. And
Right.
even, a lot of people may not realize even chiefs have this weird ranking order. And I think it's just ridiculous.
It is. And I can tell you, personally, I was at Hill Air Force Base doing an operational readiness inspection when I was on the IG team, and we were doing their ORI, and I was notified that I was, selected to be a chief. And I had an entire 12-hour shift yet to go. I mean, literally, I got told at roll call about it. Okay. And so I had another 12-hour shift actually, I was sitting in a truck listening to the radio because it was such a huge exercise that we had to have somebody listening to everything, all the radio calls that were going on, so we could bring it all together to make sure that radio calls were matching decisions and all that sort of stuff. It was hard for me to concentrate on listening to the radio calls because I'm in the truck, and I'm not going to lie, I was scared out of my mind. I was happy, but I was terrified. I didn't believe I was ready to be a chief. And so I had to talk with a friend of mine who was, and I said, I asked him, I said, hey man, I don't know if I'm ready for this. He says, nobody is.
Yeah.
If you think for 1 second that when you sew on chief that you're ready, you're lying to yourself, because you aren't. You don't know what it's going to take.
So that's an interesting comment, considering we just talked about you should only select the qualified people to make chief, when you're saying that no one's qualified when they sew on chief. No,
not saying qualified.
Oh, ready. Yeah.
Not ready.
So that's more of mentally
ready, mentally and emotionally ready.
As skills, experiences.
Yeah. And there are people who, have, roll with the punches very well. I knew that I had, big shoes to fill, because I had mentors that were chiefs, and they were larger than life. And I'm thinking, how am I going to fit with these larger than life people who, have taught me so much? Am I going to remember it? What's going to happen here? So in the selection for chief, it's about the qualification and the experiences that go into it. And they told me just to rely on the experiences. You achieved the rank of chief because of your qualifications. Now you need to, as a chief, you need to rely on your experiences to be a chief.
Okay, so I want to role play this real quick. Let's pretend I'm Chief Bass, right? And I'm being considered for Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force. And maybe I'm nervous. Maybe I think I can't do it. I'm full of self-doubt. I would be surprised if anybody gets selected or is considered for Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force and be like, oh, I got it.
Yep.
Right? Like, even when I was fantasizing the right word, even when I, in my mind play out what would I do if I was Chief Master Sergeant, I only do it for a day. Like, I don't want that job for 2 years or whatever. It's like, what was the one thing I would change if it was a day? But you talked about, when you were talked to, it's like rely on your experiences and you're qualified. But Chief Bass probably was told the same thing. But if you go back to what determined if she was qualified, it's all the bullshit that the Air Force uses for promotion. It's not the substance, because I think the reality is, how do you know shit measure someone's leadership or character, Kurtis? How do you do that?
Let me tell you, that's because the person who's doing the hiring has to have is the one that's looking at the character of the person that they're hiring.
Yeah, but I guess, like, how would you be able to measure that and then put it on paper and submit it to a hiring authority?
You can't.
It's only if you've served with them, right? Yep. And work with them and seen when the chips are down, do they give up or do they, dig in and fix things? And right.
A lot of phone calls have to be made.
Yeah.
Lots and lots. And when I hired onto the people onto the LCAT, I learned after the first couple people I hired, which they were all very, very good. So I'm not saying anything that they weren't. What I'm saying is after my first couple hires, I got to thinking about it and went, maybe I need to, I've been lucky so far. I probably need to start making some phone calls to, their boss to make sure that this person that applied, that I'm looking at that seems really qualified, has a lot of experience, talk to them and talk to their commander and talk to, former bosses, just so I have an understanding. And when people go for a job interview and they lay in the references, if they get hired without that person calling the reference, you're going to get what you get,
So here's a follow-up question. How many commanders like to be told no, like it and want their chief to say, not only no, it's dangerous for you to do that. It's a bad call. That's not the right judgment. I mean, maybe not that blunt, but how often do commanders reward that sort of chief? I don't know. I've never been a chief.
Okay. So, I must be lucky. Seriously, I must be lucky in that department, because I can only think of one commander that I ever had, and he was later shared with a friend of mine that he was remorseful in his behavior, but only one really that absolutely hated and did not want to be told no, truly. And the rest of them, you told them no, but you didn't come out and say, no, we're not going to do that. And we've talked about this before, it's a no with a caveat, or no with, however we can do this. You always gave them an answer.
Or here's the cost of your decision.
Here's the cost.
You might have suicides. We might lose these people.
Here's the cost of doing business. Or, here's the cost of suicides. And luckily enough, I never had to have that particular conversation with the commander where it was, this is going to drive suicides, because, the commanders I had, once again, I must have flown under a very lucky star.
Yeah.
Because the commanders I had were all very good commanders.
I think my commanders were about 50-50. Where 50% were really good and the other 50% were not very good.
Like I said, I have to be one of the luckiest guys out there, because I would say it was 95% or better.
But so I guess we talked about, briefly how current chiefs will say, because it seems like, and this is, making me sound like an old retiree too. It seems like back in the 90s, you had chiefs that were more independent, self-assured, and willing to say no and be chiefs.
Yes.
And it seems like, there just feels like there's a careerism cancer that just spreads in the Air Force, and it's malignant, and it's grown, because it seems like at least in the last 10 years, chiefs started becoming much more spineless and agreeable. So if you're talking about, in order to figure out someone's character, you make phone calls to call commanders and stuff. A lot of times commanders don't know their chief is trash because the chief is in the office, or going back to other conversations we had, they're getting done whatever it is the commander asked to get done under really strict resource restrictions that people experience iron in time. And that looks good. Like, this person's a go-getter. They always got the mission done. They worked really late. They worked really hard, but they might've been a horrible fucking person that ground their people up, and the commander may not ever see that. So those phone calls for character that you're talking about, unless the person calling is asking, when did the chief disagree with you? When did the chief tell you it's a bad idea? And I don't know if those phone calls I don't know if that question is happening of, when did that chief stand up to you? When did that chief get passionate about telling you no? And I think if that question isn't being asked, you're not going to find character here.
I couldn't tell you. I can tell you though, when I left my last, 6-8 months of the Air Force, I don't want to say my gloves came off, because my gloves are usually off, and it was
you just put on brass knuckles.
I think I put on brass knuckles because I was told I was jaded, because I wouldn't go along or to get along. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what I was seeing were the weak chiefs.
Yeah.
And I was, grinding them up as fast as I could, telling, as many people that these ideas really suck for our people.
Yeah, right.
You know, and you know, they dismissed me because they knew in, you know, 6-8 months later I was going to be out of the Air Force, and they were going to continue on with what they were doing. And I warned a few of my closer friends that this was going to happen. And sure enough, you know, as I'm leaving the Air Force and get down the road a ways, we're starting programs like, the one that's in Aviano,
Airmen for Life.
Airmen for Life.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sorry, Sergeant Lett. Please forgive me for not having remembered that. I'm so sorry.
I got you, Sergeant Lett.
We're seeing these where my perspective is twofold. It's the individual, and it's the individual's mental stability to begin with, and then the Air Force leadership isn't helping by making sure that that they have the tools to handle what's coming at them. You know, once again, the Air Force hasn't changed. You know, essentially the mission is still the same. We have reduced our numbers of people in our in the Air Force, and the amount of money that's being pushed. Mission hasn't decreased. You know, the operational tempo hasn't decreased. So more is expected of them for sure than when I joined in 1985.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, you know, we talk about diversity can often put an unqualified person, not often, let me rephrase that. If diversity becomes the driver, we'll say it can put an unqualified person into a position, right?
Yes.
I would argue that diversity, much like deployments and so when I say diversity, we're talking about race, gender, sexual orientation. I would also argue socioeconomic stuff. Like if you grew up poor, I think that's an important sort of thing. Many of the douchebag officers that I kind of interacted with were typically silver spoon rich kids that became officers and saw the enlisted as a servant class. But that's probably a podcast for another episode or another day. But you know, if you take race, gender, socioeconomic status, and sexual orientation, and you add those to good measures of qualification, I think you're going to get a much better outcome. I think the reality is the Air Force fucking sucks at figuring out baseline who's good, period. Right. And then what you do is you create this shitty pool of candidates where there's good ones and really shitty ones. And then you start using diversity as a discriminator, and you might have a really good black guy that's in dental, i.e. Chief Wright, and you move him up to Chief Master in the Air Force. I don't know if I'm not saying he was a diversity hire, but what I'm saying is he did have diversity and he moved up and he was a fucking rock star.
Yes.
And then you have Chief Bass, who is essentially a social media influencer that makes mistakes on social media quarterly, probably, right? So I don't think she's qualified. She should have never been in the pool. She probably should have never been a chief. Of course, I'm also, you know, really extrapolating based on her performance as Chief Master of the Air Force. She might be killer at whatever her AFSC was. Based on her performance, I fucking doubt it. I think she was more about looking good than being good. But that's also how we promote now, is based on looking good, not necessarily being good, which is those 8 things I kind of rattled off. And
honestly, Chris, if we put those, you know, all those 8 things together, you know, make up the qualified person, along with the experience, and you mentioned PME, but career broadening is very important in the land of being a chief. It really is. You have to be able to see other perspectives before you can make a perspective inside of your own, if that makes any sense to you.
You know, what's really interesting about that list too is being good at your job. Technically, it wasn't on my list.
Yeah. But so here's the thing. I would say that's a given. Okay. That's a given. I think it should be. Yeah. But I think people get promoted while being shitty at their job. Yes.
Like really shitty. I'll tell you offline, but I got a guy that's dumb as fuck.
Yeah.
And everyone knows it.
Yeah. We've talked about this individual the best. Now, was he a good maintainer? Could he turn a wrench good?
No.
Okay.
He was literally did nothing good ever.
Okay.
And he made chief.
Well, okay. So then he is
hopefully an outlier.
I would say he is the further outlier. As I say that, I don't know who they're hiring today. I couldn't tell you.
Yep.
I'm out of touch with that arena. I can tell you that the experience piece is very important. Your breadth of experience across many different levels. Mine was in command and control, and because I understood command and control when I came back to maintenance, I understood a lot of what goes into behind the scenes, outside of the scene of an aircraft maintainer. Yep. Why it's so important that they do their job and they do their job correctly, and that when you're talking about a ground abort on a B-2 for aircraft maintenance, that is a freaking showstopper at the AOC.
Yeah.
How do I know? I worked AOC stuff. So I understood when one of my maintainers made a mistake, I could go to them and say, okay, here's what you see. You see a deflated strut. Here's what I see. I see your deflated strut means that this B-2 didn't take out important targets, and now there's 200 people in a room scrambling trying to figure out how to plug that hole. Your failure caused 200 other people to work beyond their limits. Now, as a master sergeant, I was able to articulate that because of where I came from. That's how, as I see it, that's how a person should be able to present themselves. And you put all of those qualification and experience things and your diversity, who you are, where you grew up, as you said, from 0 to 32 or from 0 to 20 years old, or at what point, where did you grow up? All of those things, you bring all of those things together and you put them together, and that's the right hire. Mm-hmm. That's the right hire. All of those things together, hire correctly. When you leave large portions of your hiring decision-making process out, you get a less competent, less qualified, less impactful individual. And, when this is the first time ever I have seen, even with, Chief Cody, I have ever seen a Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force share a stage.
Yeah.
I've never, ever sseen that before.
I don't know if anybody else has seen that. I think I messaged you. We went back and forth. I was working with, I think he goes by Diamond One. It's the functional for the first sergeants. And it's hard to describe. It's noticeable for me that he's always there, just off to the side. And it very well could be that it's a really good team dynamic, but the appearance to me is, and I don't know what fucking value my opinion is. The appearance to me is he's the Chief Master in the Air Force, and she's the face of the Chief Master in the Air Force. That's how it feels to me, or how it looks.
Yep. And as an inspector, one of my common statements that I would make is perception is reality. If a person perceives it, then it's real. It's real. If nothing else, it's real to that person. And some of the things that, I've been talking here is my perception. And so it's kind of my reality, because these are the things that I perceive. Okay. And, I look for somebody like yourself to add a little something else in there so I can see something that I may not have seen in the past, and have that discussion, that important discussion that we lack in today's environment, where we have to talk about it. If we don't talk about it, and what I mean, talk about this right here. You know, what you believe, what I believe, what common ground, what uncommon ground, come together and say, okay, everybody make your own opinion, form your own opinion based on, you know, what you perceive as your reality, but also listen to what other people have to say. And if it's their perception, it's their reality. And if it's their reality, then it's worth discussing on that reality.
So what I'll say to that is, you know, part of me wants to go, I wonder if any of my biases are coming into play here. But I, in fairness, I did not scrutinize Chief Wright nearly as much as I scrutinized Chief Bass, because he, you know, I scrutinized him for those 3 weeks when I was like, a fucking dental troop is taking over. This is going to be shitty. And then he cracked a grand slam right off the bat and then kept rolling.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, okay. And my scrutiny went way the fuck down, because it was like, okay, he's really smart, really functional. He knows what he's doing. I can let off. There's no, and I was super critical of Cody before him. Like, I literally wrote, like, this is the stupidest fucking EPR process ever. This is going to drive a wedge in the teams. It's going to pit people against each other. Aircraft maintenance doesn't function when you need to put someone else down in order to get yourself a higher rating or promotion. That's terrible.
Yes.
It's awful. Like, I was highly critical. Then Chief Wright showed up, hit a grand slam, and I just I was like, okay, well, we're good. Chief Wright,
even with his, you know, his background and your perception at the time was your reality until it changed. You know, he essentially, it's changed my mind. And through his actions, I agree. Chief Wright was a very, 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 very good Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. You know, some people would argue that he was probably the best Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force.
That's what I experienced, but I was only
he had a lot of stuff to unfuck.
Yep.
You know, because there was a lot of crap.
And it's about
messed up.
And it's about instead of making incremental changes, like, let's move the big barge 1 degree north, and eventually we're gonna hit the North Pole, right?
Yep.
Like, that takes 50 fucking years to get those cultural changes. And he's like, he didn't even do like a 90 degree. When it came to the Course 15, he did a fucking immediate 180. And like, we are going in the wrong direction. We're going to turn right the fuck around, and we're not going to do this anymore. And here's what I'll say. In my experience, which is fucking narrow, very often people that have demographic advantage or privilege, which is typically white male, heterosexual, who are cisgender, identify with their born sex, right? They don't typically make drastic cultural change, because the reality for most people, everything kind of is okay, because there's not any sort of systemic sort of terrible things going on, right? So I would argue that the reason Chief Wright showed up and made a fucking stiff cultural change is, I think, based on nothing, I think people of color have a bigger investment and a bigger interest in making radical revolutionary change while they have power and authority, because if not, shit doesn't happen. And I would argue that that's what happened with, you know, the women's hair standards. Like, that was probably languishing, and, you know, Ashley was talking about that women didn't even talk about it because they're like, it's never going to fucking get better. Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force, Bass, shows up. I'm not sure how much of a hand she had in that, because I know there was also a committee that was working on it. But I'm willing to bet she put her thumb on the scale for that, as a woman that probably had to deal with the hair standards. And she went, no, we're going to fucking radically change this. And now men are looking for a radical change on beards. And we have someone in the position that doesn't have any investment in beards.
Right.
So we're seeing the most incremental of incremental changes. I think that's where diversity comes in and can really work, right?
Chris, I am absolutely on board with that perspective, if that's how if that's how it unfolds.
That's fair. So
Okay.
I think we don't disagree, as it turns out, because I think earlier you said,
Yep.
all these things, when wrapped up with a competent, qualified person, it's
Yep.
certainly okay to have diversity in these promotions and these things, as long as your baseline is qualified. So I think the reality is the Air Force sucks at figuring out who's qualified, period.
Right.
And then
Right.
they get a pool of unqualified and qualified for positions.
Yep.
And then you start picking diversity, and
Yep.
you might get lucky. Like the
Yep.
reality is Chief Wright probably hit most of, I mean, I didn't look at his bio, but he hit a lot of these things in our qualified list, right?
Yep.
So he
Yep.
happened to be a great leader that also hit all the things. And he got hired, and he made some great changes. But Chief Bass probably hit a lot of these things, but she was
Mm-hmm.
unqualified. So the reality is we are a rudderless ship when it comes to promoting.
Yes.
We don't know who we're getting anymore, because our entire promotion system, careerism, volunteerism, all those things are selecting the wrong, or they're not necessarily selecting the wrong characteristics. They're incentivizing the wrong qualities
Yep.
for promotion, period.
Yep.
And now when you add diversity hires onto an unqualified pool, you're going to get bad outcomes.
Yep. And, I don't think you can say, okay, first thing you have to be is qualified. Second thing you have to have is experience. Third thing you have to have is diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And unfortunately, they're qualifying those, essentially those three things
Mm-hmm.
In their selection, instead of looking at the entire
Mm-hmm.
perspective. Now, I'm saying that as our conversation about the chief.
Yep.
Okay. About
Mm-hmm.
Chief Bass.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that as everybody's that way, because I happen to know some people who were hired into the job where they literally fit the bill
For
perfectly.
all those things. Yeah.
All of those things. Okay. So, and some of them are good friends of mine.
Mm-hmm.
But the Air Force always has to do 1, 2, 3. They can't say, let's wrap all of this together to make to build a chief, whether it's to build a chief. These are all of the things that we need in the chief. And once again, people look at me and they say, oh, well, you're, a white male. You don't know what it's like to be discriminated against. I have back and say, you don't know my life.
Mm-hmm.
There's things that I have been discriminated against. People go, that can't be right. You don't appear that way. Well, yeah, I can assure you that it happened in my life. And did I make it define? Did I let it define me? No, I couldn't. I had other things to do. I moved on, and I think part of that was a good foundation. Did I make mistakes? Yeah, you betcha. You bet I made mistakes. Made them all the time. I tried to fix the ones that, I could. Some of them were unfixable. And for those, of course, there's a bit of regret and remorse. But as I look back in my career as a chief, I would not change any of it, because it made me who I am right now today, sitting here talking to you, which I think is a person, instead of, demanding and being hard-headed and being over one side or the other, someone who will listen to what you have to say and say, okay, yeah, man, I get it. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Here I came down the street with this big, huge bias on my sleeve. And after our conversation, I'm going, I see what you're saying. That makes more sense.
Yeah. So here's how I will see it from your side.
Mm-hmm.
I think if an organization can't discern who's qualified, and I don't mean qualified as in volunteerism and all those. I mean truly character, courage, leadership, compassion, empathy, all of those things, right? Technical expert, smart, right? All of those things. That should be, if we can't figure that out, then what's going to happen is, and I think diversity is an important metric, right? And I agree with you. I think it should be a holistic approach, which, you know, apologies to any Air Force leadership listening. I don't know. I don't have a solution how you can quantify a holistic approach to these qualities. Like, that's an impossible ask. I'm sorry.
Yep.
I can only complain at this point. I don't have a solution because I think it's too hard. But here's what I will say. I think if you can't create a good pool of candidates, and you have shitty candidates in your pool, and then you arguably and maybe justifiably hire for diversity to make it more inclusive and to also bring different perspectives which have value, but you're pulling from a pool that's incompetent, what you're going to get is you keep rolling the dice and you're going to get an incompetent person in a position. And then, much like your gentleman, or maybe, no, he was just being moved because of diversity, but much like with Chief Bass, the perception's going to be she was a diversity hire. And that's going to be really, it's going to degrade faith in the system, both in promotion, but also in the judgment of Big Blue at large, because it's more than just, hiring an incompetent person. You're giving the perception that diversity is the only metric that matters.
Yes.
Even though you've had this rigorous, I use rigorous, I'm using air quotes, somebody can see it, this rigorous, qualification standard that has essentially almost nothing to do with leadership or character, you're still going to give the perception. And the reality is maybe diversity wasn't even considered in the process with Chief Bass. We're also going on a pretty big limb, unless you know something that I don't know. We're going on a big limb that because she's a woman and because she's a Asian Pacific Islander woman, that those were heavy factors in her selection for Chief Master in the Air Force. That may not be the case. I don't know. But I think looking at her bio, I think she had less command chief experiences compared to predecessors and things. Like, I think she only did number Air Force, and I think most of the Chief Master in the Air Force had done MAGCOM. Does that sound right to you, Kurtis?
It does. And there
so I
was
guess if we can't get a good pool and we hire someone that is diverse, whether we use diversity or not, the perception, as Kurtis said, the perception is reality. The perception is going to be that their demographic, whatever that was, overrode actual qualifications, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's flip that. How often do people of color, gay people, women see a white male that is incompetent, Cody, and think that he was promoted because he's a white male? Did we ever have a conversation that Chief Cody was hired because he's a white male and he sucks? Has that conversation ever happened?
Don't think so.
Why not?
Yeah. Don't know.
And I guess, how does it feel to be a person of color how does it feel to be Chief Wright, who is exceptionally competent? I don't know if he was considered when Chief Cody was on, and see Cody be Chief Master in the Air Force?
Well, the same way that the chiefs prior to Finkston thought about Finkston. Yeah. All of the years that they put in to do all of these things, only to see him undo all, everything that they had done up to that point. And they weren't, of course, they were not, they didn't pull any punches. I mean, they're talking to, holy smokes, was it about 500 senior NCOs that day. And
that means they were dragging him publicly, because that
all got
out. Now it's on a podcast,
they were.
So there you go.
I'm going to tell you right now, they had there was no love for that guy from the ones that were on that panel.
Yeah.
They were And when I say old school, I mean, these guys were, they had lived through points in the career where people were being promoted because of the good old boy network, you know, and they look back on that and they said, not on my watch, you know, we're not going to do that because holy crap, you know, we're locking into the WAPS testing because
and then we codified good old boys into our EPR system right now.
Right.
We literally took the good old boys, which is not good, and we wrote it in AFI and restricted and quoted the process.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I can tell, I haven't heard any of the former chief master sergeants of the Air Force speak on it, but if I know them, you know, if I know them like I think I know them, they would be shaking their head going, we lived through this. This is not what we should be doing. So.
Okay. So I think to recap, the Air Force is not good at figuring out, who's qualified.
Yep.
And then, diversity is a very useful, characteristic, whatever that diversity is, as long as it is including whether the person is truly qualified, not paper qualified, we'll say.
Right.
And then the Air Force has to fix this before it can kind of solve these perceptions where people are being excluded, competent people are being excluded for incompetent. And I think the reality is that happens regardless. It's just that when you tack on a diversity sort of stink to it, I think it drives a wedge more.
It does. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that was the bias I brought to this conversation, you know.
That's fine. Yeah, that's good.
And through the conversation, I see what they're trying to get at.
Yep.
I really do. I see what they're trying to get at.
They just suck at it.
They just suck at it.
Yep.
They suck at it because everybody wants to jump on a bandwagon.
Yep.
You know, and we've seen that in just about every program that the Air Force has ever developed. And, you know, I can go back to, you know, the IG inspections changed dramatically because it became a bandwagon thing.
Yep. Well, that also makes me really nervous about this Airmen for Life thing in Aviano.
Yes.
Because the commander left.
Yep.
And I know that he had a lot of personal stake in the program. And I'm really scared that whoever kind of takes over is not going to be the shepherd it needs, is not going to have because it's not their baby. It's not going to have the strength, although it does have Air Force wide attention, which also makes me scared because that's going to draw in the shiny penny fucks that want to attach their name to a revolutionary sort of thing. And then it's going to water it down, incremental change. They're going to focus on, I swear to God, the first time an Airman for Life focuses on how to get good board scores, you can just burn that program to the fucking ground and call it a day. And I hope it hasn't already happened, but that will be the future of that program if the wrong people get control of it, I'll say.
Yep. And unfortunately, that was my concern right from the get-go. When I was reading about it, why can't they let good programs be good programs?
Yeah. I think it's because once a program gets noticed, people try to mass produce it everywhere else, but there's like a soul. There's a real core of a program that is the human element of the person that birthed it, who works really hard for it, that you can't replicate everywhere unless you have a person like that can grab it. And I think we don't promote people based on that. And so you don't have people in positions of power for that. So, I'd love to talk Airmen for Life in depth with someone, but I also know that I am the black sheep of the Air Force. And I would encourage anybody with Airmen for Life not to come near me because I don't want to corrupt or infect your program with a bad image. But if there's a way to talk Airmen for Life with somebody that's there anonymously, just let me know. I'd really be interested in walking through that. Other than that, I think we're probably wandering off topic anyway. You have any final thoughts, Kurtis?
No, I just, Well, sure. Once, like I said, I came here with, a lot of things that were coming at me in my perception of diversity. And it's a reality for me because I keep seeing the same thing over and over and over again. And it's not just, essentially in the Air Force, it's in, civilian industry as well. And California's making laws demanding diversity, but I don't think that as we unlock this thing in our conversation today, that they're actually using the measuring tool that you and I talked about as far as, being qualified, experienced, and diverse, and not going 1, 2, 3, but going qualified, experienced, diverse, all in one. And is that, does that exclude anybody? It shouldn't exclude anybody. Diversity is everybody, not just these specific people over here, but everybody. You look for what you need, and what is it that you need?
Yeah.
You need qualified, experienced, and diverse people.
Yeah.
That's what you need, and that's how we should be hiring. Not, diverse, some experience, maybe qualified. Everything needs to be the same across the board. Who's the right person for the job?
So, yeah, and I'll probably do a follow-up too, just because I had some more thoughts, and I haven't formed them yet, if that makes sense. Just had a few thoughts in my mind, but I had a few thoughts in my mind, but I'll save that for another one, especially also as you digest this episode. Plus, if you need feedback, 'cause I know you send this to a lot of your friends that are listening, and I assume you're probably going to send it to some of your friends that have been messaging you like, hey, this is what me and Chris talked about. I'm interested in what they come back with. I would argue that any company that hires anybody that's incompetent, diversity is not your problem anymore. You're literally, you can't figure out who's competent. And then getting a diverse, competent leadership. There's no company out there that wants a diverse, incompetent leadership. If they can't figure out who's incompetent, who's not, that's a problem.
And unfortunately, I know I have another story that is exactly that. Okay. They hired literally a person that couldn't speak ops or maintenance, and that was the person they hired for diversity. They ended up having to move that individual out of that position because the customer was so overwhelmingly upset.
Yeah.
That the company says, well, if we don't make the move, then, are they still going to buy our product?
I think there's a certain amount of symbiosis between people that can't figure out who's good, that can't measure the important qualities. Like we talked about, the Air Force measures a lot of tangential things that in actuality don't show whether someone's a good leader or not. And then now let's imagine a culture where you've promoted people that focus on the wrong things for promotion, whatever it might be, and now put them in charge of hiring for diversity. And they literally probably can't tell who's competent and who's incompetent anymore. As that ecosystem, as that leadership ecosystem evolves, you're going to eventually filter out your competent leaders that may not have PME or whatever, or annual awards or volunteerism or all these other things. Those good leaders may not have those. They get filtered out, and now they're no longer the decision makers. And now the decision makers, much like I've said before, a lot of chiefs didn't want to change the EPR system because the EPR system got them promoted to chiefs. Like they saw nothing wrong with it. They wanted to do it this way because it must be good because it got me chief type of deal. So if you have the decision makers that focus on the wrong things, they're going to be blinded when it comes to selecting candidates for their replacement or for lower positions coming up type of deal, which very well might have happened, all over the place, to include Chief Master in the Air Force.
Yep.
I'll say. Okay.
And think about those people who were hired that didn't meet the experienced qualified position, and now they're put in charge of a bunch of people. What do you think that those people are going to do? They're going to emulate the leader.
Yes, 1,000%.
And if they're emulating somebody who doesn't have their common sense, then guess what we have? We have more leaders that aren't going to be leaders, and
in 20 years it's going to be worse, which means you need like a revolutionary change.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks, Kurtis. Thanks for doing this episode. This was the first one after my month-long break and shift into the new sort of schedule, also in air quotes. But I always appreciate your perspective. And it's always nice that I know I'm going to approach the conversation in good faith, where none of us are going to get like upset over what someone else says. It's not going to be gotcha questions. It's not going to be perfect. And hopefully trying to find a better answer, which is always my goal, right?
And I always appreciate you asking me to have a conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Kurtis. And until next time, to be determined. Adios.